There we go. That's us live. Good evening, hello, everybody, and welcome along to another Blether with. As you can see, I'm on my own tonight. Mike's got a previous prior engagement, so he's out and about, probably picking up some awards or something tonight, no doubt. But yeah, no, thanks very much for joining us again, guys. Back on the Thursday. I've had a few weeks off, as you know, for one reason or another. And a wee visit to Wednesday night last week with Kenny McDonald, which one or two of you, I'm sure, were able to join in. So another fantastic guest again tonight, who I met earlier this year, and very much looking forward to having a good natter again. And also some exciting news associated with that as well, which is fortuitous for us tonight. So please post any questions that you might have for our guest, and for me if you want. I mean, I'm sure you don't want to hear too much from me, but feel free to ask any questions. Hello, Ian. Good to have you on board. And yeah, Ian, let us know what's in your glass, and ask us any questions if you can. So yeah, so tonight's guest is in the news just now, very much in the news. We've got Oliver Chilton, Ollie from Elixir, head blender and business manager. And as you'll be aware, Elixir very much in the news with the purchase of the Tormore distillery, which I, for one, am extremely excited about. Many of you will have passed the distillery, I'm sure, on the way between Craigellachie and Granton, going on holidays or just a wee trip out to Speyside, and longed to maybe go inside and have a look. So we'll find out if that's maybe going to be something we're going to be able to do in the future. So without further ado, let's get our guest into the room. And as Mike always says, the moment of truth, making sure that here he goes. We're in.
Right,
so yeah, hello Ollie, how are you?
I'm good. My wife just was walking in going, "Do you have the children's monitors?" Like, no idea. Every time children might arrive at some point.
That's absolutely fine. Children, dogs, all of these things. Who was it? Who was the was that a government minister or was that a business advisor or somebody had that famous on screen while he was on the news, and his kids both came into the room kind of playing musical instruments, and it was either his wife or the maid or somebody came in and grabbed them and kind of pulled them back out the door behind them as he.
Well, I hope that happens tonight. I tell you, if my daughter can walk in playing an instrument, celebration. She's only one. So that's win. Good. How are you doing?
So, you're good, yeah, you're good. So, you down in London? Do you stay in London?
I'm outside London. I escaped. So I was sadly born in London. I got through it and then I escaped once, and then you get dragged back in.
You get dragged back. And
now we've managed to escape again, and we're slowly climbing back up the country. Just a very slow climb.
Yeah. But I mean, a really busy life, and really looking forward to getting to know a lot more about you. So, I mean, how did you get into whiskey? What was the?
Well, so if you speak to Billy Abbott, he has an entire monologue about how I got into whiskey. Basically, I went to university in York to study philosophy, and if anything's going to drive you to drink, it's that. And then while I was there, I got a job in a coffee shop because it turned out it was really expensive to go to university, and they didn't even charge back then. So
the social side of it's quite expensive, I guess. Yeah,
it's killing me. Well, our first lecturer said to us, we expect you to do 40 hours a week, but you could probably do about 36 of those hours in the pub. And I took him quite literally. And then while I was in this coffee shop, the whiskey shop opened opposite, the part of the chain. And I figured that I could swap coffee for whiskey, which worked really well. Yeah. And then eventually the manager of that shop said, "Look, it'd probably be cheaper for me if you worked here." So I ended up working in the whiskey shop for a few years with two guys who ended up being two of my best friends, and they're both still in the industry. So Joe Clark, who runs Spirit of Yorkshire, and John Pitts, he's over in Pennsylvania running a kind of distillery over there. And then after that, I moved to Odd Bins and did a bit of, selling whiskey for odd bins, but it was always retail. So it was always just retail's great because you get to drink whatever.
Yes. Talk about anything you want. Yeah.
And talk about anything you want, and you're beholden to no one. I fell in love with the choice. Like whiskey it's the choice you get. So that was it for me. Choice of flavors.
Yeah. Absolutely. I should have asked you, given the choice, what's in your glass tonight?
I just poured something. So I poured some Highland Park because I didn't do a lot of prep, and so I'm just pouring the stuff that's behind me. So this is a 9-year-old Highland Park, bottled for 20 years at the Dornoch Castle Whisky Bar.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Sadly, coming to the end of the bottle and nursing it to its finish.
That's a question to ask you actually as we go through. I must remember the dregs in the bottom of a bottle. I'll write a note so I remember. I've poured one of the samples you very kindly sent up to us. I took 3 of them home, but I went to the post office to drop off. I was into the shop today to do help with the packing of a latest release, one of which happened to be a Tormore. They went out today, and as I dropped my parcels off at the post office, the guy that helps us there, absolutely cracking guy, was really helpful all the way through lockdown and all sorts. So I just reached into my pocket and grabbed him one of the samples. So he's enjoying one of them tonight as well. So it's the Elements of Isla, which I've actually not had before.
Well, no, it's sad. They've not been bottled. I think they were bottled this week.
Okay.
It was only because I had this sudden realization on Monday that we were going to have a blether and a chat, and I thought I hate the idea of not pouring someone else whiskey while we're talking. Because I've got to send something, and so we got VAT samples down. Or I guess it was about. Well, it was Friday Festival. We got VAT samples out Friday Festival, so I had some of that left, and I thought I'd send them to you, and then you could drink them, and that was it. But
that was very, very kind of you. I'm sure Mike will be able to get a hold of his at some point. And I thought I'm definitely going to drink them tonight. A, because I'm chatting to you, and B, that I've got a habit of taking samples home and forgetting all about them, and then a kind of accumulation. You'll be exactly the same. You must have a box in the cupboard somewhere. It's just full of samples of God knows what.
No, I probably should be doing that, to be honest. I could have just picked out random glasses.
Well, I've done that a couple of times, actually, just gone downstairs if we've been having friends or stuff like that and just said, right, just take whatever you want out of the box. And that can be quite good fun.
And get horribly wrong, too.
Yeah.
If you've got friends like mine who send you stuff that says, you won't like this.
You won't like this.
Yeah. I once went, so two of my really close friends, Joshua Hatton and Jason Johnson Yellen from One Nation Under Whiskey and Single Cask Nation.
Okay.
So they've got their bottling company, Single Cask Nation. And I was over in the States visiting. Joshua said, come back to my house, I'll pour you some drams. And a few drams in, he goes, I've got something for you. You're going to love it. And he poured me this whiskey. He wouldn't tell me what it was. And it was from Westland. I think it's called Westland Inferno, and it was matured in Tabasco casks.
Oh dear. Okay.
You smell something and you think, shouldn't drink that. Now you smell bleach and you know, right? That's not for drinking. Well, that's what it smelled like. And then I thought, well, he's giving it to me, so I'll have to try it. And the next thing I knew, I was actually throwing up. Which he thought was hilarious. He thought it was the best thing he's ever seen. That's the friends like
university type friendships there. Yeah, absolutely. So how did things progress with the Whisky Exchange, and how did you get to the stage where, obviously selecting the whiskies and
well, I always say luck and saying yes. Like, you want a good job, just say yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined TWE in 2011, and that was because my now wife had moved to London. She worked for Historic Royal Palaces at Kensington Palace, which is quite a nice job, beautiful buildings. And I was working at Oddbins at the time, and obviously got made redundant when they closed in 2011. And I had a really good friend down in London, Colin Dunn, at Diageo, and he said, "Come down, the streets are paved with gold. There's so much whiskey tasting work, blah, 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 you'll be fine." And it turned out that London's really expensive. So it doesn't matter how much gold you find, it's kind of redundant.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a part-time job. So I was Wednesdays and Sundays at the Whisky Exchange, which turned into, within about 2 weeks, turned into about 120 hours a week.
Yeah.
As part-time work in shop stuff often does. And kind of went from there. So I was really good friends with the managers, Chris and Alex. I'd actually known Chris forever. And then I got to know Sukhinder and ended up looking after the whiskey show, just through kind of doing events, having fun, running tastings. Like tastings were always what I always loved tasting, because it's a chance to try stuff.
Yeah.
And then after I ended up looking after Whisky Show in 2013, we started doing Whisky Show bottlings. Like we'd done them in the first year, so we did them in 2009. Sukhinder bottled a few in 2010. And then by the time I was working 2012, we started doing more. We were like doing 5 or 6. And we also started by doing single casks with Signature Vintage. And so Sukhinder originally took me up to write, to keep track of the cask numbers. So I had a notebook, and that was my job. But I really loved I love sitting down and going through things and evaluating something. Oh, this is good. I mean, look, independent bottling at the end of the day is an easy job, right?
Yeah.
It's nice, bottle it. That's not complicated. But I really enjoyed the activity of it. And I enjoyed the lack of romance, because I always thought it was romantic. Yeah. And then I remember going around Signatory Vintage around Edredown. The warehouses they're unreal. Like, it's so picturesque, it's so beautiful, and it's a dunnage all the way up the hill, and you're wandering up going, this is amazing, and everything tastes amazing.
Yeah,
right?
Always does in a warehouse. Yeah.
I mean, it helps you're drinking like whatever it was, 72 Bramores and all this sort of stuff, but everything tastes amazing. And then Skin's like, calm down, take the samples home, and then we'll retry them. And we sat in the office in our little white room, trying these samples. And I'd say about 80% of them were rubbish.
Yeah.
And the 80% I was like, these are all amazing, and now they're not. And then what it basically came down to is it was lots of spreadsheets and sitting in little rooms drinking. I actually find that more interesting than getting your feet cold walking around a warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after that, he said, "Oh well, do you want to do this as well, so you could do the independent bottling side for me as well and do cask buying?" So I was doing all the single cask buying for TWE, and I ended up looking after the brands, which like Portskeg, Elements of Isla. The guy who was doing that left. We didn't have anyone else doing it. We didn't. It was a hobby. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah. When I started, that business was a hobby. It was myself and then our designer, who was designing everything for the company, and Sukhinder, and that was it. We just bought some casks, bottled some casks. We had about 10 countries we sold to, and they were all friends. Yeah. I was messaging one last night, and I think back to those days. I remember doing my first Whisky Life Paris. I spoke no French, and my Belgian importer, so Mario, who I was messaging last night, basically looked after the stand for me because he speaks all the languages. Yeah. Basically saying, "You're rubbish at this. You don't." So yeah, it was just chance, and Elixir Spirits has generally just been a little bit of sitting in a room quite often, quite late at night, going, "Well, we could probably do that. That might be good fun." Like, for instance, Port Maturin was exactly the same. We were sitting in the room in 2013. I think it was about 2 weeks before Christmas, drinking late one night, and Skinner calls me in, and him and his brother had been sitting there, and they said, "I think about building a distillery. What do you think?" And it's like, just have a dram. Yeah, why not? What's the worst that could happen?
That's right. We're going to make some whiskey. What could go wrong? Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, having spoken to a few people now with this is whole. I mean, it's still new to me. I'm almost at the end of my 3rd year in the industry and 2nd career, as you know. But I've just been, and I suppose probably similar to myself, I've just been amazed at the opportunities that actually come along, and that chance thing it has often just been in the right place at the right time, and somebody's saying, "Can you do this?" And you say, "Yeah, okay," and you do okay, and you seem to get on with people. They think you're all right, and then off you go.
It's a really, I think the thing is, it's such a friendly industry.
Yeah.
In general, And the thing that always got me from the very beginning was, so when my first shop, the Oddbins wine shop was literally one street over, and they used to sell a lot of whiskey. So you'd think, there's a whiskey shop, and then there's them, and then there was Stamford Bridge. And York's not a big place, so
No, yeah.
Three essentially specialists in a small place. And I think shortly after that, Evil Eye opened up. But we used to go to all the Oddbins whiskey tastings, and they'd come to all of ours because it was just you're so close, and even at that level, everyone was really close. And then you get into the brand side, and you start seeing this because the industry's growing out of blending and it's growing out of trade. Right, it's a small closed network of people who trade. Everyone's friends.
Yeah.
So whether it's the brand ambassadors or salespeople on the roads, you're on the roads. You get to September, you're away every weekend. You don't see your family. But you're with your friends.
Yeah.
So a lot of my closest friends are people I've spent too much time being drunk with.
Yes.
I probably shouldn't have been in. Through whiskey. And as I said, my two friends at the beginning are still my two friends today. We all work in it because it's that industry where everyone just says, "Oh well," as you say, "Do you want to have a go?"
Yeah. And people look out for each other. I mean, we were talking to Kenny McDonald last week, Dranmore, and I just love this idea. I mean, I'm too old for it now, but I love this idea, and I would have loved it if I got into it when I was younger, of everybody doing their thing at the festival, and then the brand ambassadors is basically going for a pint after to share stories about what was that like. Oh God, this guy was wanting this, and so was asking me about, God, the most stupidest question ever, and just having that kind of downtime together, and then off to your bed on the next flight, and doing it again in a different place the next day. It sounds very, very tiring, but also just great fun.
It is great. I think it's great fun. I can't think of many trips apart from one, which was about 2 weeks after my son was born, where it wasn't great fun to do it.
Yeah.
There's always the balance when you're a small company like we were at the beginning. You're balancing that against your day job, and that's quite hard work.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the day job's pretty easy too.
It takes care of itself, doesn't it? I mean, you do a little bit of prep. I mean, the spirit's the star of the show, and that ultimately takes over.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was interesting you were saying earlier on. I've just noticed Juliet Buchan saying you're never too old. I think I might just be a little bit too old, Juliet, but thanks very much. But you were saying about going around nosing casks, and that part about straight away if it's really good. I mean, this is fantastic. This is the cask edition I've got here, just absolutely delightful. I'm just nosing it just now, but when something's really good. But having had a little bit of experience in choosing some of the shop exclusives with Mike, there's definitely been samples that we've had that I've thought were absolutely terrible. And wouldn't have chosen. And I think there was a bit of me shocked, but then I thought actually I'm really pleased that that you can do that, because I was quite worried that it would be really difficult to be able to choose, but actually it's not that difficult, because if it smells good, it smells good. If it smells bad, it really smells bad.
Yeah, I like to think of it like something sticking that said to me, and it's very true. What you learn is you've got levels of, not levels of quality. So it sounds really awful, but you've got whiskies for different things.
Yeah.
And there is dross, right? There's stuff that's not ready yet, or needs a bit of help, needs a bit of work. And that's part of your job, is to figure out, it either needs another 20 years, or it needs completely new words, or it needs to be blended with something else. And then you've got levels of whiskies that are good drinkers. They're not, not amazing. And that's where the price comes in, because you get the price out and you go, I'm not paying that for this. If it was 50 quid, no problem, plugging whiskey, go for it. And then you've got the layer of things where you're looking for the subtleties, you're looking for all of the kind of intricate detail. And that's the kind of top level, that's the upper tier. I used to get given samples from pretty much, I think, every independent bottler TWE was stocking. I wasn't getting it from a buying point of view, because that was someone else's job. It was already bought, but we were getting samples in. And mainly what I was being asked was have a look and see what levels people are bottling at what prices, and get a really good understanding. And then we did it internally. So we used to have, like, not now, obviously, but back in the day, we would have stuff that was for Whisky Exchange, stuff for Whisky Show. And we know that that's one shop that's got to sell 300 bottles. So it's got to be up here, because otherwise it's going to be a bloody nightmare. And then, okay, so this is for single malts of Scotland. So we had a very high level. I'm not saying it's not high, but you're not thinking, okay, well, there's one shop's got to sell that. You're thinking, I've got to sell it in 20 countries. And quite often you could get the price lower. So you'd be like, I can get the price lower. So it's now more approachable. So it's kind of, for me, it was learning that area, that it's not that, some things are good and some things are bad, but there's also kind of layers in the middle that I think make single cask buying actually really interesting. I mean, that's, for me, independent bottling is still, even everything that's happened this week is still my heart and soul. Like, genuinely the most interesting part of whiskey from a buying point of view, from a person sitting here drinking bottles as I look down at all of the independent bottlers drinking.
Talking about chance as well, I mean, I had obviously no idea that you were going to be at that tasting that night, because obviously it's a family friend. But I was very, very close to actually taking down one of your bottles, a Linkwood, which I opted against, and I thought, I'm so glad, because I'd have botched up the story about that
was a really good
who you were. I was like, oh my God, thank God I didn't take down that bottle. But it's a great dram. It's an absolutely fantastic dram. But
I mean, for anyone listening at home who doesn't have the context, so when we met, it was my very best friend I met him when I was at uni. He was getting married, and the night before his wedding, he decided he would have a whiskey tasting, and we were staying just down from the shop. And you guys do. It is amazing, by the way. It's a brilliant thing to do. It was a brilliant thing to attend. It was great fun, and everyone loved. Like, you're sitting in your own house, it's a holiday house, having a whiskey tasting with essentially what for us was about 10, 15 friends. It was a really good crack. And he phoned me about 3 days before, and he goes, we're doing this. I said, oh, that sounds good. And he goes, are you all right with that? I was like, well, I'm not working, so you can do what you like. I'm not. And then as I walked into your shop, I think just beforehand, I walked around looking at the shelves going, there's a lot of our stuff on these shelves. Don't bring any of our stuff. I don't want to drink my own stuff. But it was great. It was the best nights. And the funny thing is, because I've not tried much of infrequent flyers, and Alistair Walker, I used to be my account handler years ago. He used to look after me for Ben Rick when we were buying single cask Ben Rick and Ben Dry. And so for me, that was the takeaway, because I think it was an Alta vein, and it was absolutely.
It was an Athrusk. It was an Athrusk in Sautern, I think.
It was really good. Yeah, that was a really good night.
That was a good night. Nice people. It was fantastic, and it was actually a lovely range, because you'd some of the guys who hadn't really had any Scotch at all, and then you'd other guys who were proper peat heads, they couldn't wait for that Port Charlotte at the end just to kind of get something proper chewy. They were kind of tolerating the sweet stuff, but
they were mostly all Canadian, so they were all incredibly nice.
Great fun. I mean, the Whisky Exchange, it's away now, but I mean, the largest online retailer in the world. I mean, what was that like?
I think it certainly was at one point, or it certainly seemed to be. It was a really good company. It was funny, when I started, there was only about 30 of us. I mean, across the whole business. And so I started in the shop in Vinopolis, in our first shop, which was already pretty established by then, by 2011. It opened 2007, I think. And online had opened first. But it was always a family. It was a small family business. When I started, the two brothers sat in the same office. They had a big glass wall, and they stared at you, which was a bit weird.
I was going to say, what are they like? I mean, yeah.
Oh, they're lovely. So I mean, Siginder's also one of my best friends. I mean, I will never say anything bad about him. He drives me up the wall sometimes, but I've learned more spending time with Siginder just sitting in a bar than I've learned from almost anyone else. And his brother Raj is, he's, the way I always describe it to people is, when a few years ago my wife and I were accidentally homeless because we gave up our rent on our house and we hadn't bought a new house and stuff. And Rajbi was the guy who turns up with the van and picks up all your stuff,
Oh,
sorts it out.
fantastic.
And he used to do that. Everyone in the company. I think about 4 of us had all our furniture stashed at the warehouse at one point.
Oh, wow.
He very much family.
Yeah.
His wife was here after my son was born, checking in on us. So it's always been, from my point of view, it's always been quite nice to work for what felt like a small family business.
Yeah.
Even though at the end, I think we had 250 people, which was definitely different. But the boys were always pretty much the same. They didn't change much. The kid is imperiously ambitious, not for money, and that's the weird thing. I think a lot of people think it's money. It's not. He just believes he could do things really well, so he should.
Yeah.
Rajbir just wants to look after people, so and play grand designs. He loves grand designs, so
He loves grand designs.
Loves grand designs. Hence Tormore. I mean, he did not take much convincing. Do you see that building? Yeah. Done.
We'll have that. So I mean, I guess you're talking about this great ambition, and you can't. I'm sitting here with a bit of goosebumps. You can't help but almost feel excited about that ambition and the port and true, and I guess the first kind of announcement. And well, you've just been back. You've just been to Isle, haven't you? You were over for the.
I was over for the
festival. So what's the stage of building that now? Is there any turf been dug yet, or?
So groundworks are more or less finished. They were finished, but then we decided to change something. So they're pretty much finished. The main contractor is on site now, and they will start foundations, I think, start of July. Project, because it started, as I said, our first conversation was 2013. When we first arrived, we first found that site in March 2014. We went up for Sikin's birthday, myself, Sikin and Rajbir. We chose that site that week. And someone asked me during festival, they said, when do you think Spirit will run off the stills? And I'm looking at the plans of Georgie. We've gone through like how long things will take. And I said, by March 2024. And they said, oh, you seem very definite. I was like, yeah, because it's taken us more than 10 years to make Spirit. That's a pretty sorry state of affairs.
Well, but planning and stuff like that's not easy, and particularly, I guess, on an island where infrastructure is a bit of an issue as well. So it was, I guess, it was some kind of issue.
That's definitely true. But I think one of our biggest barriers is we were always down here, and we had loads of things. So the good thing about the sale of TWE is it does free the mind a little bit. It makes you not have to think about the dozens and dozens of things that you were thinking about. And it allows us to concentrate. And that was always the plan. It maybe came a bit earlier than I think we all thought. But it was always the plan to concentrate on building a distillery and then building a distillery company. And, we've always said, Sikinda has always said to me, his ambition was to have a distillery company, not one distillery. It was always there to make great spirit. And build that kind of business. So it's quite exciting to be at the stage we're at now, and it does feel like it's moving. We have weekly meetings, and you see change on the site whenever you go up. It's different, which is nice.
It's very, very exciting. As you were saying earlier, he's not doing it for the money, but you need money to be able to do these projects. And it's all very well having some grand ideas about how you like to do things, but you have to have cash in order to kind of put those things into place. So. He does need to have that kind of business acumen, which he obviously clearly has, in order to advance it.
Oh, he's not daft now. But no, it's been, but it definitely feels like it's moving faster now. And it definitely feels like we have probably a greater sense of purpose. I do say to a lot of people, you have to remember a lot of what we do is just. Everything we've done has actually been a hobby. If you think about the whole company, it was just something that you were enthusiastic about. And then if you're going to be enthusiastic about something, you kind of want to make it your life and hopefully pay your bills. So even the Whisky Exchange was the same. And I feel like now we're kind of moving on to that next stage, which is we've been learning. and now we get to have a bit of fun and test out what we've learned. So.
Absolutely. I mean, and you see a bit of fun and stuff, and I guess with that vision, with the whole of Scotland to think about, and given that shoehorning another distillery onto Islay was never going to be particularly easy, why was Islay a choice, or what was it? Because you'd already been working with Islay whiskies and some of the releases, and
so I think there were a couple of things. One, not even working with, but Sukhinder had a particular affinity with Islay whiskey.
Yeah.
It'd be wrong to say with Islay because I think he loves Islay as a place, and I personally do. I've been going to Islay for a very long time, but for both of us, it's probably whiskey first, and then we've learned about the place and the people over the last 10 years, and now I think Sukhinder's got a lot of good friends. I've got a lot of close friends, and I've been incredibly supportive. Also, at the time, 10 years ago, Ardnahoe wasn't even a thought. We looked at that site to put it into context. So we could have built that site instead. We didn't. So I don't think the pressures weren't as high then as they are now. There were certainly more challenges to building on Islay or building on an island at all, which probably in hindsight maybe you'd avoided. But that being said, I don't regret any of it, because what I've learned is although there's definitely issues with the infrastructure, I don't think the answer to those issues is to not do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The answer is to engage and try and find solutions. So we're limited. You can't rock up and replace all the roads because you're not allowed to do that. You can't fix the ferries, as you can see on major newspapers.
Indeed.
Not that the industry hasn't tried to do that, to be fair. The industry at large has put solutions up, which have been knocked back, which is a shame. But what we could do is things like housing. So there's a housing shortage. We can build housing. We've got enough land to do that. So we're building 14 houses next to the distillery. All for workers. We're not looking to rent those out for holiday or anything like that. It's just be able to bring people onto the island, because one of the biggest problems Islay has, or a future problem that's appearing right now, is that it's got a massively aging demographic. Everyone's getting older. There's less and less people in the schools, and the way school systems work is the less people you have, the less money you've got. So we can help with that. We can build housing that's appropriate for families, so that either families who are from Islay can stay, or families who want to move there can move there and be part of the community. And as a small business, as a small family business, with essentially, there are 4 owners in our business: Sukhinder, Raj, Jasmine. That's it, just the 4 of them. It's really easy to talk to them. You can pick up the phone. Anyone could pick up the phone and have a chat. And it means that we went to a lot of the community council meetings, and you listen and you learn. That's why you do all these things. You listen and you go, okay, well, this is this problem. What can we do? And I feel like even speaking to other distillers in Islay, particularly like Anthony Wills, Kilhoman, as a small family business, you can engage with that and you can find solutions. And that's what I think responsible business should do. You should find solutions with the community that you're going to be in, or that you are in. So.
I've heard that from other people who have worked for small companies, and it was very much a case of, you want to do something, and the owner just say, no, just get it done, just go and do it, it's fine. Whereas when bigger conglomerates kind of take over, it then becomes committee based, and it's got to go to this office before it filters through to that office, and before you know it, the idea has vanished into the ether, and you just never get things done. So so there is that wonderful thing about a smaller organization where you can get things done and people listen. So it sounds ideal. Just before we kind of go any further, just having a wee look at a couple of the questions just to kind of make sure we're Ian, certainly heavily engaged, loves the podcast One Nation Under Whiskey. He heard you on it a while ago, and he's wondering if there's any best moments with Jason and Joshua. I don't know if it's a story you told in the podcast previously, or
no. Well, if the one I was on, if you listen to it, there's one moment on it. I'm not sure it's the best moment, but it's certainly the most terrifying. So I was driving across I think we were driving from, I can't remember, driving back to New York from somewhere for like this 2-3 hour drive. And Joshua said, you know what, let's record the podcast when we're driving. So when these guys record, it's like, I mean, Josh is obsessed. So he's got all the kit, like big microphones. He's got a laptop with a big deck, and it's incredibly professional. So if you can imagine, he set that all up in the car. I mean, it's a big car.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, big cars in the States, yeah.
So we're driving along with all this kit set up and microphones, and we pull up next to the police. So that was the first moment of like microphone, looking around at the policeman, being like, okay, it's a bit awkward. And then as we drove on, when we picked up the car, we were told, oh, the windscreen, it's taking a bit longer because the windscreen was hit by a bird, and it smashed the windscreen. And we got up to some speed, we were doing probably about 50 miles an hour on a major road, and suddenly there was an almighty bang and thwack as a bird flew into our windscreen. And that's on the recording. You can hear it as the three of us basically scream because we all think we're going to die. So that is probably both my favorite and most terrifying moment, and the worst interview I've ever done in my life. No one else has almost tried to kill me in a car while interviewing.
Jesus. Yeah, there's no experience without adventure, I guess, at the end of the day, is there?
No, absolutely. I'm just hoping the same thing doesn't happen tonight. I'm in my house, so it's fairly safe.
So yeah, I mean, I guess you were talking about the move into distilleries and it becoming. I mean, it's a huge change of direction, isn't it? To become a distillery company as opposed to a retailer.
Yeah, it's funny. It is and it isn't. I like to see it as I think it's quite a very sensible progression, because where we differ, and I'm not putting I don't want to ever sound like I'm putting someone else down, but because of the route we've taken, and you'll know this, when you're stood in the shop, on the shop floor, and you're speaking to a customer, you really get an understanding of what they want, what they want to understand, what's interesting to them.
Yeah.
I'm also an enthusiast. I buy far too much whiskey. I brought another bottle home.
As you can see from behind me, I'm the same. Yeah.
Nice to pick up a bottle of Tormore, 1984, today for 30 odd. I was very chuffed with that. So that's in the back of my car because I don't want to tell my wife yet. And
it's okay. Nobody's going to hear on here, so you're fine.
Absolutely. It's unlikely to be listening. More whiskey stuff.
Between you, me, and the whiskey industry, we're fine. We're fine.
But you learn all of that, and then when you take that, like you guys are doing when you're doing your bottlings just for the shop, you're taking what you're learning and you're applying it to putting something in a bottle. And I kind of see it as a progression, or a regression in a way, where you're taking everything you're learning at the very front end, of the people who actually do the work, selling bottles of whiskey, and then you're applying that to what you make, as opposed to doing it the other way, where you make whiskey and then you hope to God you can figure out what they want at the other end. Yeah. I like to think it gives us a better purpose, and it's also incredibly historic. Like, it's exactly the same journey that John Walker and Sons Alexander Walker took. Yeah. It's the same journey that Chivas Brothers took. Yeah. Same journey. They were shops, they're retailers who got into blending something for their customer because they figured they could figure out what their customer wanted, and then they wanted to own the spirit that went into it because it made the financial sense. So the only difference is we haven't kept the shop, but can't have everything. So
I guess that ultimately you could go back to that, and with visitor centres in your distilleries, you'll have a shop of sorts anyway. So
yeah, I hope we never do. I hope we'll always have a focus on selling in a traditional way into an import and independent retail, because that's our background. And I strongly believe independent retail is still the future of whiskey. It's still the best way to reach a customer. It's the best way to get someone into the category. And I don't believe that even, yes, you want to sell a lot of whiskey of your own whiskey, you want to make the best product. But we're into category building, right? The battle is not, will we be able to sell more bottles of Tormore than Glenallachie? That has nothing to do with it. Yeah. It's growing a category,
Yeah.
and say, is this the category let's steal market share from vodka? Because frankly, no one needs vodka. It's clearly the most used apart from for cleaning. So we need to convert every vodka drinker tomorrow.
I'm with you all the way, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, it's maybe not a question you can answer, but because I guess there's business sensitivities within there. But I'm aware that Pernod Ricard as a company have got a bit of previous with sort of buying and selling between particular companies. I mean, when they came in for Whisky Exchange, was Tormore already on the table, or was that just something that kind of developed as a future conversation?
It was developed as a future conversation. It wasn't part of the actual. It was certainly mentioned an interest to move into distilling, but there's certainly nothing formal. But it's. I think I'm not close to that relationship because we're kept at distance. Even within the building, which we're getting chucked out of shortly. But I think what is true is Pernod Ricard is, although it's a very large multinational, it still has a family ownership structure.
Yeah.
Right? So in some ways, you still have a person to speak to, or certainly Sekinda does.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably helped them doing something with another distiller who maybe doesn't have an ownership structure like that.
I mean, I love if this is a business model that they've got now in allowing smaller businesses to pick off some of their distilleries and almost run them independently, then I'm all in favour of that. I think there's so many distilleries out there lying. I mean, Diageo have got God knows how many distilleries lying just sleeping or almost like staring at the television, not doing anything. That you just think, gosh, why don't they just let kind of businesses who are looking for something to do? There's some incredible ones. I was up as I went into Strathmill a couple of months ago, just because I was aware the distillery was there. I was down in Keith, and I saw there was a right away. So I mean, ordinarily I'll go into a site anyway, unless there's a big gate. I won't climb over a gate, but I would usually go wandering in anyway and try and not make a pest myself. But there's a public right of way goes through Strathmill. So I just got the dog and went for a wee walk. And as I was coming back from my walk, there was a guy getting into a van with a Glen Elgin t-shirt on, really nice lad, who basically is doing a bit of maintenance and security, because there's a handful of sites that he goes around every day just making sure that nobody's broken into, and they're all sleeping. I mean, they're all whiskies that are available through independent bottlings. And you just think, God, I mean, they're all whiskies I really enjoy. Why can't these just be owned by individuals who want to run it? Strathmill's got the railway siding as just they've got the Keith to the Dufton railway goes right past the distillery, and there's actually a siding, and you're thinking, God, you could have a carriage there and host tastings inside the just an incredible opportunity to do something just completely different, and it's just sitting there silent, and you think that's just such a shame.
I understand. I agree. Like the customer agrees. I also see that, you speak to the guys who deal with all the stocks for the likes of Diageo and Chivas and Beeps and Tory, and the reality is they're under pressure. They're under pressure to make whiskey for massive brands, and it's really funny at our level. And I was thinking this the other day because we were talking about how many cases you're going to sell for next year of Elements of Ida. So we've just done the new blend which you're trying, and I'm being tasked with making that over and over again. So I'm looking at the stocks, and it's okay. Well, how many cases are you going to sell, and what does that work out to in bulk liters? And I still get blown away at the sight of 100 casks or 50 casks being dumped. And I'm still like, quantity is still huge in my head. And then you go and think to yourself how many cases that makes, and then you go and look at the figures for Johnny Walker Black, and you go, we're all so tiny. And then when you put that out into litres, you go, that's why I didn't need all these sites. That's why it's so far away. But to some degree, it's always nice, like we've had with Tormore, it's nice that you get an opportunity to show something to it's probably from a malt whiskey drinker, its true potential.
Yeah.
That is a great opportunity. So.
And yeah, so yeah, moving on to Tormore. I mean, I guess we before we came on air, we spoke about how iconic it is. How I don't think anybody has ever. Here we go. Yeah.
So
I might have to crack one of them over myself. Just seems we're.
Every time I go, I've been up in Speyside for the last 6 months. I've just been buying every bottle of Tormore I can find.
So you'll need to get one of these then from. Do you know Andrew Smith, Little Brown Dog?
No, I don't.
They make gin, so not that far from where he was staying at the house at Fetternear, just outside Inverurie. Andrew was a vet. I think he's just recently given up practice. He's on Arran just now, so undoubtedly he's over there buying casks. But him and his business partner Chris, who's a farmer, started making gin for fun, and eventually it became a more of a kind of more of a thing. But they've got their own little warehouse, and they've been buying single casks, and it's one of these things that's just starting to grow. So their first release was on Arran, and then they've done some sort of daft stuff with, I mean, small scale, but they've done some daft stuff with the Calvados. They released a Calvados, which they didn't call Little Brown Dog because it was a cognac. It was a Petit Chambron. But then they shoved Linkweed into the Calvados cask and released that bottle. But yeah, so their latest one was a Tormore, and because of the topiary, if you get a chance to go onto their Facebook page, you'll see the video that they released for this distillery. They're saying that because they've left topiary there, they now own Tormore. It's like planting a flag. Elixir do it, Little Brown Dog do. But they took up some kind of topiary images of the L, the B, and the D, and a dog of Little Brown Dog, and just did a daft video of the release for this Tormore. But this is finished in a Takachi cask, a Hungarian wine, which I've never had before. Apparently very, very juicy, so I'll pour one of them later on as well. So it's been all about Tormore, and it's one of these distilleries that, interestingly, I had a customer in the shop a couple of weeks ago who, so I think Whisky Broker occasionally do a Tormore now and again, or have done.
There's been a few. There was a lot of 1988. We actually bottled 3. Well, I mean, a long time ago. Last one was 2016. So we bottled 3 88s. There's a big parcel of 88s. And those signatory have bottled some. Clanheads have bottled tons. So they've got lots of 84, 88, 89. Of which I bought quite a few. And I bought them before, to be fair, but now I'm buying in earnest.
I've always enjoyed, and it's always been a fantastic spirit. I think the last one I had was, there was a Parcels Tormore, wasn't there?
Yeah. No, we've not done a young one. I've got we have got a bit more stock. We had a little bit of young stock, but to be honest, the wood wasn't great, so it's really racking. So we probably won't touch it for another 3-4 years, I'd imagine.
So must have been a Whisky Broker one I had, but the customer came in again just recently in the last week or so. I think last Saturday, just saying he's a huge fan of Petit Vey, and he struggles to find anywhere. He's from Dufton. And he's if you ever see a bottle, let me know, I'll buy it. I don't care how much. And he was talking about Tormore, and I was aware that the Whisky Broker have got some releases coming out soon. I said, I have no idea what's in the release. I said, but if they've got a Tormore, I'll just buy a bottle for you. He doesn't do online. So I said, I'll just get a bottle for you and you can square me up. So we got back onto the Tormore subject when I then became aware that this release was going to be a Tormore, and then the announcement for you guys. So it's just been kind of Tormore. And it's not a distillery that's ordinarily regularly spoken about or discussed.
No, it's a funny one because there's certain vintages where there's quite a bit of stock, and obviously G&M have historically had it, but it's not. It's never been a big name, which is it's ridiculous just because of the building. Because anyone who drives past it, you have to stop. You can't.
Yeah, you can't
stop next to that building. It's insane.
Well, you would crash if you didn't stop because you've got to go like that and look at everything, you know.
And the spirit's lovely. I love the fact that it's very light. It's all that kind of pears and pepper, basically pears and black. And there's something really beautiful in that kind of juxtaposition. I've never had it in sherry, so we'll have to see how that works. I can't really imagine it. Most of the casks I've seen have been first fill or refill barrels, so which is pretty classic for Chivas. So it'll be really interesting. I mean, we're a bit away from getting completely under the hood because we don't take ownership until September. So it's like exchange completion. So it's a bit. And then we have to, you have to take time and understand it. And we've got a lot of questions about, are you going to change it? What are you going to do? And the answer is we don't really know because
you've got to see what like first, haven't you? Yeah, absolutely.
You really have to understand it first and give it its respect because it's already producing very good spirit. So,
but there's so much scope for things. I mean, just reading Robin Lang's description in his Rivers of Whisky River book, and there's a lot of good information about Tormore in there. And he talks about the pond at the front, which was originally built as a curling rink. And you thought, so are you going to make a curling rink there? What are you going to do with this? Are you going to try and get fishing for pearls again, or
I remember when we went around because obviously it's empty, and we asked, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we health and safety." And you said, thinking, well, of course it's health and safety because it's a really big company. So there's probably a lot of probably don't have a pond at the front of your distillery. The site around it is beautiful. There's a lot of warehousing, so it's a really interesting place. And I think it's obviously from a whiskey point of view, I'm very interested in what we can do. But from a visitor's point of view, it's such a great opportunity.
Oh, fantastic!
To open it up.
Yeah.
But it's a listed building, so we don't. I remember reading that and going, "Oh."
Yeah, I saw that as well. Yeah,
it's listed. That's not, that's obvious.
You might still be able to. You might still be able to build the whiskey bottle shaped chimney though, because that was in the original plan. So
we'll have to be. It'll take time because anyone who's ever dealt with a listed building, which is what my wife does professionally, knows that basically just add on time and money.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Julia's got a fantastic question, which I think I know the answer to, but she's just saying, did you purchase a fair amount of the stock too? You bought all the stock, I think, did you?
No, well, no, we didn't get a look at all their books. We bought a reasonable sum, certainly enough to start creating a brand for Tormore.
So what's the warehousing capacity there?
I think it can store 75,000 casks, but it's not all Tormore on site.
Yeah.
It's split between a lot of different makes. Chivas makes it, other distilleries now. Again, it's something we've not looked at yet. But yes, it's quite large storage. But the deal includes enough stock for us certainly to launch product. It's more limited on the older stock. There's not as much older stock in there. But there is some. So there'll be working quite hard on that and how best to present it, how best to show it. But we're quite a way off because, post pandemic, the world is still on fire, as everybody is obviously very aware. I think with the way packaging is at the moment, we're probably the best part of 12 to 18 months away from being able to put something in a bottle.
Yeah.
And that's just buying glass.
Yeah, absolutely.
The liquid's actually the easy bit. Just rock up and
packaging, labeling, cardboard for, etc. Yeah.
We're a little bit away, but that gives us time to think about it and work out what it is and how best to explain it to people.
But it's just incredibly exciting. We take tours. I can't remember if I said when I spoke to you last, but we also do tours from the shop.
Yeah.
So typically speaking, if you guys had wanted to do an all-day tour, we'd have picked up in the morning, would have headed up to Speyside, maybe poured a couple of drams on the way up the road, stopped at our first distillery, Glenallachie, for example, back to Craigellachie for lunch, and then maybe up to Glenfarclas. And you've got Cardew, so there's a few there that you can get to play about with, but having Tormore in the list as well just adds, from our point of view, adds another string to what we can do, what we can offer in terms of a day out. Because it's a fantastic valley just to dot back and forth, and even stopping at places like Dalhune and having a look at the wonderful building at Dalmunich, and just sitting and looking at it, just getting out of the van and taking a few photographs, and then stopping at the river for another dram and stuff like that. It's a brilliant area. So to have, as I said, to have another and a wonderful, beautiful building to be able to do that is it's very, very exciting, I would have to say.
I'm looking forward to it. I've been spending a lot of time, I think I said to you when I saw you, I've been spending more time in Speyside in the last 12 months than ever before. We started using a lot of warehousing in Speyside, and we're using a lot of vat tanks there because you can't get the vatting space.
Yeah.
So it's easy to vat in Speyside. So I'm now in Speyside probably every 6 weeks, and back up the road in a couple of weeks because we're loading up some new sherry casks. And it'd be nice. It's nice to have a home.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have a home that we can go to. It's a great project. Do you think you'd see yourself moving? I mean, you're talking about getting out of London eventually. Do you think you'd see yourself moving to Aberlour or some of these kind of places? I don't know. Well, I've not told my wife that yet. So, well, definitely. I think from a personal point of view, definitely being in Scotland is closer to home from me. So my mum's family's all Yorkshire, my mum's actually from Edinburgh. But I, as a kid, every holiday was spent in Yorkshire. Every single holiday was spent in Yorkshire, and it's where I went back to for university and stayed for a very long time. So the north of England was always, I think, more of a home to me than the south. I mean, that being said, I moved a lot as a child, so I moved all over the southwest, Somerset, Cornwall. But I think slowly but surely, from a family point of view, we'd much prefer to be north of the Wall than south of the Wall. If you can't, basically, if you can't be in God's country, then you've got to be in Scotland, right? Because,
yes, absolutely. The People's Republic of Yorkshire.
I actually have, just because of that, I have some Filey Bay, so I'll probably drink that. I think from a personal point of view, we've never talked about where. I've loved the West Coast as a child. We holidayed. So my dad was living in Cornwall, and he always said that you could only go one place if you live in Cornwall, and he goes to Scotland, and ideally the West Coast, because it has to be more beautiful than the place you're in. Yeah. And to be fair to him, he's right. There's very few places more beautiful than the south coast of Cornwall. But the west coast of Scotland had whiskey, which was a big sales point for him. So we used to go to the west coast, and then later on we started going east. So I kind of feel like it'll be one of those two places, but where we don't know. And I'm very lucky again because I work for a family business. We have quite open conversations. Skinner knows that I'd much prefer to be in Scotland than England because it's easier for work. When you're spending as much time as I do, essentially on an aeroplane flying between either London and Glasgow, London and Inverness, or London and Edinburgh. I no longer do fun flights. I just do those three. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I love it because I love driving. I could drive through Speyside every day of my life and be a happy man. And the drive to Kennaicraig is one of my favourite things to do very late at night. But I'd much rather do the drive and arrive home. Yeah. Do the drive and arrive in an airport.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I think one of the questions earlier on, talking about England, was in terms of future distillery building, or do you think England would come into play within the company?
Early days, we talked about building a distillery within our current warehouse in London. which is not a particularly fashionable part of London. I have to stress it's in Park Royal, the largest industrial estate in Europe, otherwise known as the ex-Guinness site.
Yeah.
But we never did it. We ran out of space because the shop grew so big. I don't know whether we do it now. I guess you'd have to have a reason, and it wouldn't be to make English whiskey particularly. Don't get me wrong. I'm really supportive, and I'm particularly proud of people like the guys at Spirit of Yorkshire, because I know them really well. I've known Joe for almost 20 years. And I think what they're doing is really good, and I think there's great stuff being made in England. But you have to feel like you can add something to that and do something positive. And I don't know right now whether we have the bandwidth to get involved in something where we really add to that community and engage with it in the right way. Whereas, ironically, in Scotch whisky, because everything's so established, because we have a slightly different perspective, I feel like we have an opportunity to add something to that.
For sure.
I put and True particularly, I think we can not only bring, as a family business, something to our community, but we can also bring something to distilling, because everything on Islay is frankly very traditional, and that's great because it's great whiskey. It's by far and away the most compact area of great distilleries in Scotland and in the world, which is quite amazing. But they all make one, well, outside of Bacardi, they all essentially try and make one thing. Bunnahabhain obviously makes a few, but concentrates on one style. We can bring a slightly different philosophy from our background, and essentially add another layer. And it's not better than anyone else. It's not about that. It's just we're able to add something to that and bring something to that community. Whereas I think in England there's so many different options, and I think we'd be a little bit lost in that, to be honest.
I totally agree. I think there's still lots and lots of room for innovation and differences within Scotland. Despite the fact there's so many distilleries here, there's a lot of room for smaller companies in particular.
Yeah.
And I think back to just that whole excitement about it. Proper excited, and a bit. You're talking people, and people are bound to do it. I'm no different. I'm like, oh, why don't you buy this? Why don't you buy that? But you've got to be able to walk before you run. You're just about to build one, start distilling, and then take over. A wonderful place as well. So you're going to want to do those things right before you think about. I guess.
I think our commercial director wrote in the frequently asked questions thing that was sent out to us. So we were all prepared. Are we going to buy any other distilleries? And his answer was, no, we've got enough to do. And I could hear his voice saying that as he was sitting there going, I'm not sure how we're going to do all of this. It's actually quite a tiny team. Before we got Whisky Exchange, there were 9 of us. And I have to tell you, for me, that was huge. 9 people was a lot. Because when I started, obviously, it was just me. And for quite a while, there were only 3 of us. There was permanent staff in Elixir Distillers. There was myself, my ops manager, Andrew, who's still working with me. He's coming over onto the blending side. And our sales manager, Katie, who sadly left, but she's setting up a shop in Bristol. And it was a great crack. It was the best time because it was a lot of fun. It was very free. Yeah. But in terms of the growth since then, there's now, now we've got a head of marketing. We've got people doing actual jobs, not just us sitting in a room drinking too much, coming up with ideas.
This is good. Let's buy it. This is good. Let's sell it.
But even given that, we still only have, I guess it's 11, 12 people, 15 people across the whole company. Counts the lot, which is tiny. It's really tiny. So we'll be hiring a lot of people. Anyone wants a job, give me a call.
Well,
got to find a lot of people real quick because it's definitely going to be a challenge to do everything we've decided to do. but wouldn't do it any other way.
That's exactly the way it should be. And you talk about sitting around having fun drinking whiskey. There's still, well, maybe one or two. I never got to meet Ronnie Cox yet, but Ronnie always looks to me as if he still sits around enjoy. I know he's just retired, but I'm sure
I saw him last week. He didn't look very retired to me.
Well, maybe we say retired in inverted commas. Does anybody in whiskey ever actually retire?
No, I think that generation's amazing. I was actually on the phone today with Doug McIver, and Doug he's one of the best human beings I've ever met. He's really kind and really generous, and it kind of goes back to the beginning of everyone in the industry is really helpful. You ask questions, they give them to you, but those guys have been doing exactly what we've been doing, kind of drinking and having fun and coming up with ideas for the best part of 40 years, and it seems to have served them pretty well.
Yes. They've done not bad, actually. I mean, actually moving perfectly on to one of my little wee things that I wanted to ask you, just down the bottom of the page. Who would you say have been your biggest influences then? And I mean, apart from Sukhinder and
apart from Sukhinder, I think in terms of I look at people like Ian Logan, who I think it more than the presentation or anything else, it was the respect that he gave everybody. You walk in the room and he gave you respect and he chatted to you on an equal level. And I felt that was something that was very particular almost to Scotch whisky.
Yeah.
There's the other guy who absolutely, well, now I think that's loads. The other guy who really kind of blew my mind was a gentleman called Dr. Inatomi, or Tommy. He's a Japanese guy. He's based in Glasgow. He is writing a book on old whiskey production. He's been writing it forever.
Okay.
And I remember taking him to Whiskey Show Old and Rare a few years ago. He's a very understated man, very quiet, very funny, great sense of humour. Yeah. And he knows an awful lot about whiskey production. But what he doesn't tell people is that he was the man who designed and built Hakushu. He was the man who designed the blend Hibiki. So when you go through his career, you're just like, oh, wow. But he's so understated. And again, he treats everybody with utmost respect. And he shares so much. And he phones up, like we've spoken to him about the distillery on Isla regularly. We go for dinner regularly. And he's just happy to share because all he wants is for you to make great liquid. That's what's important to him. And I find people like that. I think those are the people that really inspire me, and more than anything, because I think that's how the whiskey industry should be. It should be really open. It should be really kind, and it should be an industry that helps progression, helps people make great liquid. I find that outside of Scotch too, and I should stress it's not just Scotch whisky you get. I mean, obviously, Dr. Natomi's Japanese, although very much moved to Glasgow, was part of the kind of Beam Centauri, or part of the Centauri story. But you find that even with Patrick Van Zuidam. Do you know Millstone whiskey? If you've never had Millstone, it's worth checking out. Great stuff. Okay. They own a distillery called Zuidam in the south of Netherlands. His parents were liqueur makers. They make very good liqueurs. Again, Patrick, I turned up his distillery and I was very open. I was like, well, we're building this. I want to understand this.
Yeah.
And he just opens the doors, right? And tells you everything. Like you ask a question, he gives you an answer. I just think it's people like that that make the industry really special and really open. But what they all have is they have self-confidence that you know, and I think this is quite important. You have to believe that you're going to do a good job. And it doesn't matter if someone tried to copy you, that's irrelevant because they're not you.
Yeah.
So I aspire to be as open and and as helpful to people as those people have been to me.
For me, I think the wonderful thing about, I mean, as you say, people open the doors and they're happy to share that. Within my old, I worked in the NHS, mental health care, and I was astonished for my whole career. I was astonished at how protective people were of their position. Because I used to think there are literally millions of patients out there. You're never going to be out of work. Don't worry about if somebody starts doing a job with somebody you're looking after, because you'll get somebody else. But there was so much protectionism. People wouldn't share stuff. They wouldn't. And I'm thinking, this is the National Health Service. What is the actual problem here? And a lot of people were surprised at how open I was. You're not worried if you give that person to work with somebody else that you'll not have any work to do. I'm thinking, oh Christ, there's a pile of referrals back there. If I can clear some work, I'll maybe get through some of the other stuff. But I just couldn't get over that. But for an industry that's actually about business, which would make sense to be a bit more protective, the whisky industry is just not like that. So for me, I'm blown away by the fact that somewhere where you should be sharing work and you should be happy to pass over and do things, it was very much like not that way. But another where there is finance involved and stuff, that people are so happy to share and innovate. But I think you're absolutely right. What you say is you're never going to copy anybody else, no matter how hard you try. Everything is different. And one of the things I've kind of read more recently, and you'll be more au fait with this than me, but been doing a kind of few tastings within hotels and just kind of looking for a different angle to kind of base the story rather than just say, here's a whiskey, here's another one, here's another one. So talking a bit more about the regions and about the reasons for the regionality between, but it's all historical, because the regionality issue now is more or less defunct. Because you can't say a Lowland whiskey tastes like this in the Highland. It's a fact of the matter that every whiskey from every distillery actually tastes a little bit different. And that's what I think is wonderful now. Every place has got their distinct mark. And I guess you guys have got a chance to do that again and add to that kind of rainbow, if you like.
I always found the regionality thing really fascinating and infuriating for exactly that reason. So I remember when Billy Walker launched Authenticus, Benrick 21-year-old. It was winning all those awards. I don't remember this, and it was 04, 05, and it was winning Best Isla Whiskey for 21-year-old Speyside kind of thing. So illegal. So I, from a very early point in my career, I always thought, oh well, regionality is obviously bunkum. It's obviously rubbish. But the flip side of it is, it was very useful to sell bottles. And as I've kind of grown up and become a little less cynical, only a little, I'm still pretty cynical.
There's nothing wrong with being cynical. I think that's a survival technique. I'm quite happy with it.
I'm still pretty grumpy. My nickname at work is still Eeyore. That's not changed much. but the thing I've learned is that a lot of the things that have come about that I think are nonsense are techniques to sell bottles. And at the end of the day, we're in an industry that employs, I can't remember how many people now, 41,000 people or something. And again, going back to that as part of a small business, something I'm quite proud of is that everyone who works for us, we're helping them pay their mortgage, their rent, build families. As an example, Andrew, who's worked for me for now, 6 years. Since I met him, he's got married, bought a house, has a baby, and I like to think that we've been part of that as a business. You're part of that. So frankly, if they can sell more bottles of whiskey, is it so bad? No. Could it be done better? 100%.
Yeah.
So as a small business, we could do that better. But I've decided to I don't do much on Facebook anymore. So this will come as a shock to anyone who's seen me on Facebook. But I decided to pull back from being really angry about things that are obviously nonsense. One day I'll even forgive the WSET for their spirits section.
I'm in the process of trying to withdraw from social media, and feeling I'm not as bad as I was, but that whole kind of getting angry at stuff for absolutely no reason is just insane, and you think, why? So I've actually stopped reading some posts. I've unfollowed a whole load of stuff that I shouldn't be following. Politics in particular. Sport is kind of still in there a little bit. I'll probably withdraw from that a little bit more, and actually just go and watch some sport rather than actually read about it. You know. And,
yeah. My things the last 2 days, obviously, I've been back on Facebook to talk about the Tormore thing, and the thing I said to a colleague today, I think the thing that made me laugh was I was looking down and I suddenly realised what upsets me about Facebook is you go down and I see an advert for whiskey cask investment, then I see an advert for Viagra, and then I see an advert for hair loss, and I went, you know what? The first two are the reason for the last one, right? 2 kids, I'm knackered and my hair's falling out, and I'm really pissed off about cask investment. So if none of those adverts exist, I'd have more hair.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, a couple of things actually. One of the things we spoke about at the start when you held up your bottle was just a wee drop left in it. What's your thoughts on oxidization?
It exists, but it's quite fun, both in cask and in bottle.
Yeah.
I mean, in cask, it's such an important part of maturation.
Yeah.
It's why. So one of my bugbears is always stuff like when people go, in this country it ages 10 times quicker. It's fucking rubbish. Does not mature faster. That is not a thing. You get more wood extraction, but that's not maturation. They're very different things. Maturation cycles are beautiful curves that go up and down. And you get all sorts of changes. One of the major ones is oxygenization, which affects different compounds that create flavor or change flavor. So it's a massive part of maturation. In terms of bottle, we did experiments at work in the early days of Whisky Exchange where we clearly had too much time on our hands. We did such random things like dropping bits of wood into whiskey to see what would happen, and making lots of ridiculous pictures of Billy Abbott, which we've never posted on social media. But one of the things we did was we looked at oxygen in a bottle of whiskey, and you can see it change. Right, it definitely has an effect. I think there's still a Tim Forbes post on the Whisky Exchange about OBE, Old Bottle Effect, and that's oxygen. It's a mixture of oxygen and sometimes the capsule. In the capsule, and it changes how the whiskey tastes. But in terms of drinking at home, I'm never as fussy as drinking at work. So I quite enjoy. So, for instance, the Highland Park is what 63.7% ABV. I'm not going to worry too much about alcohol oxidization at 63.7.
No,
To change it, it's probably going to make it out. It'll probably be a much nicer whiskey by the end of the bottle than the beginning, which is probably need to buy another one if it hadn't sold out. But a low strength at like 40%, then it's going to degrade pretty quickly. And then once you get into degradation, it becomes a little bit of a game of what else has been done to the whiskey. So has it got colouring in it? Because that's going to change. That's going to come to the fore. And frankly, alcohol caramel is horrible. It tastes bitter. That's not a political thing. I just don't think it tastes very nice. So if you've got high strength whiskey, I think it's not bad. Leave it open, have a bit of fun. If you've got low strength whiskey, there are all sorts of gases you can buy to plug into your whiskey and do that if that's your thing.
Just mix it with something, or
Well, so I know
doing a place with Coke or Iron Brew.
Well, I mean, so I've got can't see it in the camera, but I've got 4.5 litre or 5 litre demijohn, which is just my odd cement.
Okay,
it goes through phases where it tastes great and phases where it tastes rubbish.
It's absolutely rank. I've always wanted to do that, but I'm terrified. The thing is, I'm terrified of actually. I've never actually had that much whiskey that I'm thinking I've not really enjoyed this that much, so I'm just going to put this into an infinity bottle and see what happens to it. Most things I think I've enjoyed so much I want to finish, and the other ones I really don't like. I either give away or end up pouring for unwelcome guests, so that kind of thing.
That's not. We were laughing the other day that I think I've had about 5 people into the house in about 2 years.
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
And when I worked that out, the worst thing is they're all from work. So literally haven't had a friend here for years. I probably need to change that.
I think so. Absolutely, it's about time we started inviting all our whiskey friends, our proper whiskey friends, around for parties and stuff.
My first whiskey club, which is a club I really need to restart, was called the Finishing Club. So we had one rule: you had to bring a bottle. It could have no more than a third full. That rule was broken once. Okay. It ended up with a really hideous reggae song. And the rule was that we couldn't go home until it was all done. And in some ways, it's a disgraceful club. Like, obviously, it's not proper appreciation of whiskey. We weren't sitting, we were nosing and tasting at the start, but by the end, we probably weren't doing that. But it was a lot of fun, and I kind of feel like sometimes when you read reviews and whiskey notes and all this stuff, you're like, it's all a bit serious. It's a drug. We're supposed to make something fun and enjoyable, and I'm all for as a profession taking it very seriously.
Well, there's a level where there's a kind of level where you have to, because there is a kind of business element to it where you've got to be slightly serious. But ultimately, it's for fun, it's for enjoyment, it's for sharing with friends, and it's for memories and all those kind of things. And I think for me that's what whiskey's about. And the friendships that you make along the way as well are the most important thing. We spoke earlier on about Charlie, and we won't say too much about him, but he's possibly told the story to everybody, but when he was on with us, one of the stories he told us was the one about heading off to a fishing trip on the River Spey, the River Tweed. So he was driving south, suddenly realised on the way down he'd forgotten to buy a bottle, and he was aware that he was supposed to buy a bottle because they would have expected him to buy a bottle. So he just flew into the first service station as soon as he remembered and picked up a bottle of gut rot and threw it in the passenger seat, dashed off down and fished for the day with his friends. And they were quite happy. They'd caught a salmon. It had been a cold day, so they were back in the bothy afterwards, kind of warming up. And the host basically just cracked the top off his bottle and divided it between the whole party. And they all said it was one of the best drams they'd ever tasted. And it was nothing to do with the fact that it was a 16 pound of whatever from wherever. It was the fact that they'd had such a great day. There was a lovely salmon sitting on the table in the bothy, and they were all warm and happy and sharing the experience of the day. And that's the
best time. It doesn't. I will tell you now, it doesn't work on 3-year-old whiskey from Sweden in 2000.
You do get some big salmon in Sweden, however. That's maybe that's a story for another day.
100%. I'll be honest, that's a lot better than the story Charlie told me. I was waiting for you to talk about throwing shit out of a window. So
he never told us that one.
Relatively sedate though.
Did you see his adverts for Eldorado?
I have, yeah.
Oh God, absolutely fantastic. And we were able to talk about that night as well, which was really good, because he was talking about being in this fortunate position where he'd been given a bottle of Macallan, a kind of very small sample, not a small sample, a sizable sample. And however much the whiskey was actually worth, he worked out that this sample he'd been given was about £2,000 or £3,000 worth. And he was talking about tasting it and having to work on all this sort of stuff. And I said, I assume that one of your tasting notes wasn't swanky then, Charlie.
I would hope at £3,000 it would be at least a swanky.
A little bit swanky. Oh, fabulous. I mean, a couple more sort of serious questions before we carry on. Just a little bit about the organic question. What's your thoughts on organic whiskies, or is that something you think you might try and do at Port and Trewin? Or
I don't know really. I think I had a really good conversation with one of the sales guys in Berry Brothers and Rudd the other day about wine. So, I drink wine. I think like other people, I drink wine because it's easy. It's fruit juice. So,
yes, indeed it is, yeah.
But I was really intrigued by the idea of organic wine and natural wine. And something he said to me, there are instances, particularly with organic wine, where it's very good quality. And it's good quality because it's organic, they've really cared for the grapes, the soil, and the environment around it. So it's more about that aspect. So the idea that you've made a good quality ingredient, it's not a good quality ingredient because it's organic, but it's a good quality ingredient because they've cared for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think there's something there. In terms of whiskey, I tend to, I'm definitely not on the Mark Rainier side of the terroir argument. I am largely of the belief that it's all not rubbish, but it's one tiny aspect of production.
Yeah.
I'm very clear. For me, the most important aspect of production, bar none, is the distiller. Right? I've had the great luck to spend time with some of the best distillers in the world. I believe I work with one of them.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak to them, what it's about is understanding what's going in and understanding how to manipulate that to get it out. Because at the end of the day, it's not a natural product. Right?
Yeah.
There's no way it's natural. There are no instances, as far as I know, of a barley grain accidentally malting itself.
Indeed.
Getting ground down, sitting in some water and finding some random yeast and bacteria and instantly fermenting, and then
living in a tree for 3 years. Yeah.
Boiled up by the sun. It doesn't. That doesn't happen. Right? It's not. It's different to wine. It doesn't have that natural aspect. However, I do believe that if you use good ingredients, same as cooking, if you use good ingredients it makes the job of the person distilling a bit easier.
Yeah.
A good cook can cook with almost anything to some degree, but they'll tell you they want great ingredients at the start.
Yeah.
So if you give them good ingredients and then allow them to the best kit possibly to manipulate that to make a great spirit, then you're going to do a great job. But yeah, I'm not in terms of, is it really important? I don't know. I think it's more important that you're getting the best ingredients. If that happens to be organic, then that's nice.
Yeah,
probably a marketing story. Marketing definitely not my side. Largely not allowed near it.
Fantastic. Well, listen. There's lots more we could ask, and lots more I'd like to ask. I think what maybe do is just kind of call a halt there for tonight. Thank you very much for coming on. One of the main reasons I think is Mike is desperate to catch up with you as well, so we want to be able to do this again, maybe something fairly soon, because I guess things are developing really quickly with you guys. So if I'd love it if we could do a part 2 and let Mike kind of come on board and get to meeting and get to know you as well. And I'm looking forward to maybe getting to know you a bit better as time goes on as well. Ollie, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you again, and I'm so glad I bumped into you that night, and I'm also so very, very, very grateful I did not take down one of your bottles.
Maybe both. It'd be a lot more awkward when you're like, what's your name? We'll not say it.
Especially I kind of completely destroy the story of the actual whiskey, and actually that's not quite how it.
It's been really, really fun for me. So thank you very much. It's not at all. And I will be not too far away from you very soon, so I'll probably pop over.
Fantastic. Well, I guess if you're in Speyside as well, I'm a never herder, and I have days, so I'd be more than happy to pop along and meet you for a coffee if you're up for that at some point. Fantastic. I'll get you just to hold on. Just before as I go off live, but guys, listen, thanks very much for listening again. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Juliet, for thinking I'm not too old. Really appreciate that. That's cheered me up no end tonight. Thank you, Kat, our colleague, Kat Housley, who works at Glengarry, but she also spends a couple of days with us in the shop. I think she's actually coming on a tasting with me next week, which will be quite fun. She just reminded me that I replaced my political points on Facebook now with pictures of tractors, which is which is a hobby you'll find out all about me as you get to know me a bit better. Ollie, I'm very much a farm vehicle fan. So,
I mean, we can talk for many hours. My father-in-law was a farmer, and we have many tractors in this house.
oh my God, that's fantastic. Okay, well, that's we could have a conversation on that on its own. But guys, we've got some great guests coming up. Next week, we've got Alistair Longwell from Ardmore, coincidentally. The release from Little Brown Dog this week was a Tormore and an Ardmore. And next week, we've got Alistair Longwell from Ardmore. So please join us again. Mike will be back with us as well. And have another blether then. So in the meantime, thank you, Ollie. Thanks, guys. And we'll see you again next week. Good night.